I'll tell people we were supposed to speak live, maybe I think it was 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and then I got an email from you with a horrible picture of a
Yeah.
part of your house being burned.
Yes. So it's an outbuilding. So the house is 100 years old. So the house wasn't touched at all. And there was a building. So there is a garage, and next to the building, there's a sort of a thing that was used as a shop. We used as a shop. I think originally it was a garage for like a Model T, right? It couldn't fit a modern car in it, but it's this tiny little room that had been used as a garage. And unfortunately, the rest of the house, electricity's been updated, but that building had a 100-year-old wiring in it. And we know there's a lot of rats crawling around the property. So probably they bit into something or, you know,
It's a great
undetermined exactly what happened. But
way for me to start. I didn't introduce you. I'm going to say in a second who you are, but I'm going to use this as an introduction because a lot of people use analogy for AI as electricity. So if
yeah.
years from now, someone's house is going to be burned because their AI model is being given back and something doesn't work.
Yeah, I always thought electricity and oil were bad metaphors uh, because they're fungible, but AI isn't. AI runs on data, and I have data for one thing. I can't use it for something else the way I can with oil and electricity.
So let's introduce you. Peter Norvig,
Okay.
I don't know if I should, what title I should use. I'm gonna say three different things and tell me which one is the one that you feel is. First of all, you were the director of research at Google,
Yeah.
and I think is in itself a story that we can dive into. I spoke to many of my friends at Google, telling them I'm gonna talk to you, and they all said you're a legend there. So there's that
Hmm.
bucket. Then there's the academic. You're a professor. You've been a
Yeah.
professor in so many places: Berkeley, USC, Singularity University. You were the head of research at NASA. So many academic thing. And then maybe the claim to fame that I knew you before I knew you live or in 2D is that you're the author of the textbook on AI, the one that
Yeah.
every person in every university who studies
Yeah.
AI studies, kind of like the authority in AI. So, which
Hmm.
bucket is the one that you think is the one that is the legacy?
I guess we could talk about all of them. I guess probably the textbook, uh, and then getting to do one of the first big online classes. I think that's more unique. I'm certainly proud of what I did at Google, but you know, Google probably would have ended up in more or less the same place if they had had somebody else doing it.
So the book is now edition number 4, taught
Yeah,
in probably 1,500 universities, hundreds of, probably thousands of classes from beginners to advanced, titled AI Modern Approach.
yeah,
And it's written in 1985. I guess
yeah.
maybe question number one is what changed in your definition of AI since 1995 to 2025?
Right. And I guess it is ironic to call it modern approach if it's the same title as we had in 1995, which now seems so long ago. Uh, I guess a couple things changed. So first of all, I think the book itself and the reason it was successful is that we introduced it at a point of change. That there had been previous books in AI, and I had used them as a student and then in my first years as a professor, and I thought they were good books. I really appreciated them and appreciated their authors. But the field of AI was changing in the mid 90s, right? So it was changing one from this idea of expert systems, which said the way we're going to build an AI system is we're going to go out, we're going to interview an expert, we're going to try to duplicate their thinking, and we're going to do that by writing down rules for what they do. Uh, and now we use machine learning more than expert systems. And so, one, we're not so much trying to say, let's duplicate their thinking. Rather, we're trying to say, what's the objective? And let's optimize that objective. And then two, rather than saying we're going to use the blood, sweat, and tears of graduate students to code up logical rules, we said we're going to learn from examples. So that was a big change. And then I guess also sort of moving from logic with some tweaks on it, which was what we used in the 90s, to more focused on probability and data, and then on neural nets, which kind of have a probabilistic interpretation, but are really just playing with the numbers. Uh, and so those were all changes that we thought were important. And I guess, we were lucky in that our book came out as the first to kind of recognize those changes. And then, I have talked to some of the competitor authors and asked them, why didn't you come out with a new edition? And they said, yeah, I was thinking of it, but it would have been a lot of work. And your book was good enough. So we didn't bother. We didn't bother doing a new edition. So then we were kind of stuck with it.
So I know this book thoroughly with highlights and pages and so on. But here's what I'm going to say: the last edition from this book is from 2020, right?
Yeah.
It's no longer modern. And if you would write this book in 2025 January, it would be outdated in April. What should people do right now when they want to learn about AI? They start with the book, or
exactly. So I think there is useful stuff in the book, but you're absolutely right that it's not up to date. And a book as we know it couldn't be up to date. And that's one reason why we haven't done a new edition. In that, and I'm still looking, and a lot of the work I'm doing now is trying to say what's the successor to the textbook.
Mhm.
So it's got to be something that updates on a more frequent schedule. I want it to be more like a GitHub repository than like something that you get a new edition every couple of years. Uh, and I think it should be more interactive. I want to be able to play with it and run simulations. And instead of seeing a static image, I want it to be manipulatable and dynamic. And I want videos and speech and sound and everything else. Uh, and I want it to be personalized. And I feel like we don't have that now. So we kind of have two extremes, right? So in a textbook, I get to say, here's one path through the material. It starts at page 1 and goes to page 1,000 or whatever it is. And your only choice as a reader is saying, what do I want to skip?
Hmm.
So that's one end, and that feels like too controlling. I'm too much in charge. So sure, I'm an expert, but I'm not an expert in you. So that feels wrong. And on the other side, we have a blank box in an LLM that you can ask any question you want, and usually it will reply pretty well. Sometimes it will make mistakes, but usually it will reply. But there's no guidance as to what questions you should put into that box. So I want something that's kind of halfway in between, something that says, an expert can say, here are some possible paths through the material, but you as a user can say, well, I'm more interested in going in this direction. I really want to dig in on this. The level of mathematical sophistication you have is wrong for me, so rephrase it in some different way. Focus more on this application area, which is my favorite, and so on and so on. So I want it to be kind of mixed initiative. And I feel like the two things we have now are at either end, and we don't really have something that's in the middle. And when we have that, then you'll see the next edition.
I agree. I think I think you're basically saying, if I had to summarize my sentence, education is changing because of AI. I don't really know how it's going to land, but it's clearly not the old one, and it's clearly not the new one. It's something that new that needs to exist.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, so now let's use your lens as an AI person for over 40 years. Give me some predictions that you made early in the days of AI that you think are now materializing. You said this one, I said it first in 1980s, and I'm going to ask you the same thing. Things that you said that you're totally wrong about. Things that it's by 2025 we're going to definitely have robots with the weapons, and this is not
Yeah, yeah,
true.
yeah. So I guess it's probably like 2005, 2006, maybe. My co-authors and I did this paper called "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Data," which is a play on Wigner's quote. And I think that's has played pretty well. I think we're seeing even more and more of that, and certainly in a way that I never would have expected. Right. So, as you said, I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm an AI hipster. I was doing it before it was cool, and you know, if you work in a field for 40 years, you can see it become an overnight sensation. Uh, and so when I was in grad school, I was doing language understanding. And the way we thought about it is saying, well, there's some words on the written page, and we got to do some linguistic stuff with that, right? We got to know something about noun phrases and verb phrases and all those kinds of things. But what we really thought was, yeah, there's something going on the page, but most of what's going on during reading is up here in the head. And so we thought, the linguistics part, that'll be the easy part. And the hard part will be saying what's really going on in the head, where you feels like you really got to understand what's going on in the world in order to make sense of a text. Uh, and we were really focused on that, of saying, what kind of knowledge is in the head, what kind of processes go on there. And now we see these large language models to just say, no, we're going to have as sort of as unbiased a model as possible, almost a blank slate uh, in the head of these machines. And basically, all it knows is that there's an idea of sequence and there's an idea of attention. And then we're just going to fill it, feed it trillions of words and do self supervised learning. And it's going to learn to be pretty good. And I don't think anybody expected that. I certainly didn't. Uh, so that was a shock to me, right? So even though I was pushing and saying the power of data is really important, and if you want to do better, you're much better off coming up with better data than trying to invent a better algorithm. I didn't really think it was going to go to this extreme.
I guess maybe I'll ask you. So you convinced me on the kind of gap between 1990 to is now that it's there. Are there still
Yeah.
things that surprise you? Like ChatGPT 5 comes and you say, oh my God, I didn't see it coming. Or now that we're in this bucket of we know how attention works and we know how kind of the linguistics work, you're still surprised every couple of weeks, or now you see it fully?
Uh, yeah, I guess I'm not that surprised, right? So you see constant improvements. I guess I'm also feeling like uh, as a field, we grew up, I think, in being more quantitative and being more driven by metrics. And I think that's mostly a good thing, but I am starting to see some of the known disadvantages of that, right? So, when I was a grad student, you could get a paper published by saying, here's a completely different way of looking at the problem. And it seems interesting, but I haven't really shown any results from it. And if the reviewers thought it was interesting too, they would publish your paper. You can't do that anymore, right? From now, what you have to say is, number one, I meet or exceeded the state of the art on the following metrics. And then, by the way, here's some things about why it's different and why that might be interesting. But there's sort of these table stakes of you have to reach at least parity on these metrics. And so I think that's good in a way, in that it rules out about a bunch of junk. But I think it also stifles creativity, in that in order to get to parity, you have to kind of build up a whole mechanism. And so it becomes much easier to say the only way I can reach that score that's going to be entry into the game is to make very small changes to what exists before. If I was going to throw it all out and start all over, then it would take me years to get back up to that level of score. So I worry about that. Um, then, other than that, I think most of the advances we've seen are along paths that I felt like I could foresee, and I think most people could foresee. Right. So we start off by saying, well, we're going to build these large language models, and you're going to give them a prompt, which is a prefix, and then they're going to predict the next word, and then they're going to predict the word after that, and then predict the word after that, and they'll just spit out a sequence of words. And I think I felt, and I think probably most people felt, well, it's impressive that that works as well as it does, but that doesn't really feel like intelligence. Just spitting out one word after another, to me, that feels more like artificial politician and not artificial intelligence. Some people are really good at just spitting out words. Uh, and so I think most of us in the field felt like, well, we're going to have some kind of reasoning. And that's what we're seeing now. So instead of just spitting out words, they say, well, we're going to try 5 times and then come up with possible results. And then we're going to criticize those results and compare them and vote and rank and so on. And after we've done all of that, then we're going to finally output something. And so that seems closer to real intelligence. And we've certainly seen progress, right? So, one of the things I think is really exciting is the progress in getting machines to write programs. And I wrote this thing a year ago, maybe a little bit more now, of saying, well, yeah, if it's kind of a rote problem that there's lots of examples for, it's really good at that. But here's some examples of more difficult problems, and here's how every single existing LLM fails miserably on these problems. But then I ran that again after a year had passed, and now half of them get it right. So, and next year, probably all of them are going to get it right, and then half of them are going to get even harder ones right. So we are seeing pretty rapid progress. And to me, I feel like we're on the right path. I don't feel like we have to throw it all out and start all over again. Uh, but I do feel like it's hard to be creative because the stakes are kind of higher and costs are higher, and you need a lot of data and a lot of computing power to get anywhere. Uh, so I'm a little worried about that.
It feels like a commentary on the current AI ecosystem almost.
Yeah, yeah. But it certainly is possible to do interesting work. Uh, without $100 million table stakes. And so we saw like this DeepSeek came out, and a lot of people were really surprised that they performed really well, and their budget they claimed was much smaller. Uh, to me, that was not surprising at all because we've already seen much smaller models be almost as good as the big models. In fact, I've talked to teams at Google and at other competitors saying, well, I'm insulted by all the attention on DeepSeek because they said, look, yeah, sure, our big company's flagship model that was very expensive to train, which makes sense because we're amortizing it over millions or hundreds of millions of customers. But internally, I've got this small research group with 3 people, and we built a model, and our model was cheaper and performs better than DeepSeek's, but we weren't allowed to publish it. And so, I feel insulted that we're left out of this game. It's not like they made an amazing breakthrough. It's like, yes, we did know you could do that. It is kind of state of the art that it is possible to take uh, a smaller model with less compute power and do almost as well as these frontier models.
What are you working on these days? I kind of asked you to
Yeah.
like the history of AI. What's occupying your desk right now?
Yeah, so really, this thing that we talked about of what's the future of, uh, well, for me, textbooks, but to make it a little bit more general, the future of education in general. Uh, and so I've been doing some of the work with the Notebook LM team at Google. I think that's a great tool, which is mostly aimed at you as a user. You've got a bunch of documents that you want to understand. So you load the documents in, and you ask questions of it, and you can visualize it in certain ways. And it gives answers that hopefully don't hallucinate because they're grounded exactly in the documents you gave it. Uh, and I think it's great for that as a tool for the learner. And I want to have something that's equally great as a tool for the author or curator or the expert to say, here's something that I built and I want to hand it to you so you can use it. And I've seen examples where people say, I was so excited with Notebook LM. I put all the stuff in and I understand it, and I wanted to share it with my friends or my teammates. Uh, and I gave it to them, and they said, "Well, now what do I do with it?" It's like if you didn't build it yourself, it's hard to understand what's there or how to work with it. And so I don't think that's a fundamental lack in the technology. I think that's some small sort of user interface changes could make that much better.
I mean, I see the kind of headline. Are you working on projects like this through companies like Google, or you're your own person who's kind of saying, I want to do?
Yeah. So far, mostly through Google, also some through Stanford. So I have affiliation with both right now. Uh, I think uh, it's easier to work through Google because there's so many existing customer relationships. So if you have a good idea, sort of the path to get it out to being used by a lot of people is easier than if you're trying to do it on your own.
I have an
Uh,
extra asterisk question to you, just
yeah.
before I continue on the projects. Are you a
Mhm.
good manager? So notoriously, academics are not great at the business world, and the audience of our podcast is going to be mostly, I think, business leaders who want to go to AI. I'm curious, how is an academic doing in a corporate world? Is it
Yeah.
to manage people? Is it like
So
how's it work?
uh, I think I'm a good manager in certain situations and a terrible manager in other situations. Uh, and so I've always been in managing kind of academic research groups, but especially at Google, it's sort of with a product focus. So it wasn't, the goal isn't to write papers. The goal is to have an impact and build stuff that actually works. Uh, but the employees I have are a lot of them are PhDs, and a lot of them come from that kind of research background. And I'm good at that. In other environments, I think I would be terrible. And I remember, you have to take all these corporate training classes. And I remember there was a class called situational leadership. And they have this 2x2 matrix. Everybody loves the 2x2 matrix. And they say, you know, what do you do if your team is skilled or unskilled and motivated or unmotivated? And I did not make myself a friend of the teacher because I said, oh, I really like the quadrant where they're skilled and motivated. And if I'm in any of the other quadrants, I'll leave and I'll go someplace else. So the teacher was very upset with me, but there's a lot of other people in the class who were nodding and saying, "Yeah, right, I'm with you." Uh, so put me in the right situation. I think I can be a good manager. But if it's not the right situation, I think I would not do well because partly is this academic bent, partly it's I'm pretty introverted. And so if I'm required to kind of motivate and keep everybody happy and so on, I'm not going to be good at that. But if it's everybody's self-motivated and the important part is communication on a technical level and making decisions on which direction to go, then I think I can do that in partnership with my team.
We're recording it right now, end of August 2025. It's important, I guess, to say it when you talk about AI, because if someone watches it in like 2 weeks, it might be totally
Yeah,
outdated.
yeah,
But here's why I'm saying that. In the last week, there were a lot of conversations with CEOs and leaders of AI companies who said we're in a bubble. That's it. It's like I think there was a study, kind of clunky study, I think in my mind from MIT, that says that 95% of AI endeavors are going to crash or make no money and so on.
yeah.
So, to you, what do you think? Are we in a bubble? Is it like for the business leaders who watch us, are they kind of should pull the money and like put it now back in crypto? Uh,
I don't think it's anything like crypto. Uh, yeah, because I think crypto is kind of inherently it's not producing value; it's just moving value around. And so I think AI is more inherently moving stuff. That the MIT report was really interesting because we've seen lots of other reports. So I'm uh, associated with Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute, and they put out this AI index. So that was, ancient history. That was like a month ago, or maybe 2 months ago. And there's a table in there of, a meta study of productivity gains, and there's one or two that are no productivity gains. But then there's like dozens that are 10%, 15%, 20%, and so on. So much more positive outlook. And I haven't read the whole MIT study cover to cover, but I have seen the abstract. And I think part of what's going on there is saying it's hard to do top-down programs and have them be effective, especially in the short run. And I think if you looked at those companies, they probably are getting productivity gains from AI, but it's not through this company sponsored program that was saying we're trying to achieve X and we told everybody to do it. And now we measure and we don't measure any gains. But all those people are probably individually uh, using AI on their own to summarize their emails or whatever it is they're doing on their own. So I think this kind of bottom up appropriate usage is already happening, but it's hard to measure these top down goals of you shall achieve the following.
Remember,
Uh,
a final question. So if I'm an investor and I have small VC, but a VC, and another AI tech team comes to my office with two kids in a garage, but with an idea, and they say we're going to build another LLM and so on. Do you think that something has changed in the last couple of weeks that says it used to be a great idea a year ago, but now we know that it's going to be about and you shouldn't invest? Or you say it's whatever it was a year ago, it's still the case today?
uh, I think there probably a year ago there was a lot of people who saying, "Well, I really have to get on board, so I'm not going to worry too much about what these two kids can do. I just want to be in the game." And so I think it's good that we're not doing that anymore. And so if it was my money, I would say, what's your plan for how you're going to help people? And how is that going to generate value? And how are you going to capture a share of that value? And, uh, you know, the answer wouldn't be we use AI. The answer would be we're going to do the following things to solve this following problem, and part of the reason we think we can solve the problem is because of AI. But you should think of that as incidental rather than think of it as, oh, I have to have AI in my portfolio.
Actually, I'm gonna still remain for a second in business, and I'm gonna ask you to merge two lenses. You were the director of search quality on Google. So you had is search over changing drastically? So when you can now not get tens of pages of results, but really get the bottom line, is that over? And also kind of a follow-up immediately is if that's the case, if it's over, how do you see the world of advertising adapting to no
Yeah,
longer search engine and so on?
yeah. I think it's kind of two questions, right? So one is we've already gone through multiple generations where search radically changed, right? So the first one for us, and it was still on my watch when this happened, was when people started carrying smartphones around. So, you know, when they were using their laptop or desktop, if we got a really good result up in the top 10, we felt pretty good. You really want great results at the one, two, three spot, but if it's anywhere in the top 10, you sort of feel like, uh, well, the user's going to see it. And if they see it, there's a good chance they're going to click on it, and then it's a good chance they're going to be happy. When they're on their phone, they're not going to see all 10. They're going to see two or three. And so that really changed what we had to do. We felt a lot more pressure to say it's more important to get it really right. So that was a big change. Then when they people started turning on speech recognition, that was also a big change because we had sort of trained our users in you speak English or whatever natural language you speak, and we taught you this new language of Googleese in which you just use keywords. Uh, but then when they started turned on speech recognition, that all changed. And all of a sudden, people are saying, "Hey, Google, can you please tell me?" And they're giving us, 10 and 20 word queries rather than 2 and 3 word queries. So that was a big change, right? So we're used to these kinds of revolutions, and so AI is just going to be another one. So I don't see that as disruptive. I don't see that as search going away. I see that as AI being kind of part of the user interface of how you display the results and interact with the user. Now, certainly in terms of how does this affect advertising, I, I, I think that is a big issue, right? And so Google has participated in the advertising ecosystem in 2 ways. One is advertisements on the search results page, and second is a marketplace for advertising when you click through to a site. Uh, and if there's going to be less clicking through, then that is going to change things in an important way. And some of the metrics say, yeah, so far it looks like there's less clicking through, but the people that do click through are kind of more qualified. And so maybe, the total number of sales you get in the end hasn't changed that much. Uh, and maybe that's true, but as AI gets better, you kind of think like that is going to change. And so there may have to be some alterations in how the whole ecosystem works. I think we kind of fell into this advertising driven world, and it didn't have to be that way. Um, it just an accident, and I think a big part of it is free is such an attractive price that it's hard to avoid. And it used to be that newspapers got most of the revenue by selling pieces of paper. And then they also had advertising inside that paper, but most of the money came from the nickel or the dime or whatever it was when you actually bought the newspaper. But then when they had to start compete with radio or television, in which it's completely driven by advertising, then that all changed, and newspapers started to be driven by advertising as well. But it could have gone a different way. We eventually got cable TV, but it could have been from the start that television and radio didn't have uh, advertising. They were driven by some kind of subscription model, and maybe the web can move to more of a shared subscription or a pay-per-view or a micropayment type model. That could be part of it. I know there's a lot of talk of licensing of content. Uh, I think that's important, working that out. So in radio, we work that out, right? Uh, Used to be you bought music by buying a physical record. Then radio came along, and we invented this system where every time a radio station plays a song, they pay some royalties, and that gets split out to the artists. So maybe we need something like that.
So maybe I'll ask you kind of, and you might, I think I predict the answer, but is
Hmm.
behind closed doors Google not seeing this as like a different thing than all the 5 previous ones that you mentioned? They see it as like just one more thing we have to prepare for. They're not seeing this is the one that we have to really. I'll tell you why I'm asking. The CEO, the founders of Google went back from retirement to take over.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
this happened that made me as an outsider feel that they think this one is different. But you're saying it's just one more.
I mean, I can't speak for all of Google, and I'm kind of more on the periphery now, and to some extent, nobody can speak for all of Google because there's thousands of different voices. Uh, I think, we had times in the past when we thought there were existential threats, and uh, so Android and Chrome were both answers to that, right? At one point, it was like, oh, Microsoft has come out with a browser, so Google's going to be in trouble because they're going to lock all their users out. And then Chrome was the answer to that. And then Apple has come out with a smartphone, and Google's going to be in trouble because all the customers are going to be there. And Android was the answer to that. Uh, so, you know, this is a big change, but there's been big changes before. And, I'll let somebody else decide the the relative magnitude of this one versus the other ones.
So here's a threat that's not a Google threat, but it's a AI cybersecurity. Uh, that's my kind of ancestral field. That's where I started, grew up, and so on.
Yeah,
I feel that here there's also a new approach and a new type of thing. And I'm curious what you think of this. Like, is the world ready? The fact that we didn't have a big hack that kind of came from an agent that just gave everything means that we're actually doing a good job protecting it. The fact that the election in 2024 wasn't totally rigged means that AI
yeah,
are doing a good job, or we just didn't get there and it's going to be the big threat of the
yeah.
next.
But nobody knows, right? And it's like the same thing. We've got all these AI doomers saying, "Well, we're all going to be enslaved by robots soon," and maybe that's true. And we had doomers saying we're all going to die in a nuclear war, and we didn't. But maybe we came really close to it. Uh, I guess in the conversations I've had with cybersecurity experts, I've been encouraged by what they say, and kind of the feeling I get is that this should be a net positive more than a negative for a couple of reasons. One is that the good guys can afford to invest more than the bad guys. And secondly, uh, the sort of cynical view of today's systems are just terrible. And the reason cybersecurity is such a problem is that we build these systems that are so full of holes. And so, yes, it's a game between the attackers and the defenders. But if you start out and defenders have this house built from Swiss cheese, you're starting out in a bad place. And sort of the hope is that you can build the next generation of systems with AI and give it this goal of saying, build something that's protected. Uh, and now, yes, there'll still be attacks of various kinds that you'll have to deal with, but you'll be starting from a much safer place. And I guess I believe that. Uh, on the other hand, there's this idea that most of the attacks are kind of low technology, right? And so, you know, there's an XKCD comic. There's an XKCD for every possible topic, but there's ones that said, what computer scientists think about cybersecurity, and it's like, oh no, to break this 128-bit encryption, I'll need to invent a quantum computer and run it for 100 days. And and then in reality, the answer is take this $5 wrench and hit this guy over the head until he tells you the password. Right? And I think that that's where a lot of the cybersecurity threats really come from. And I guess that will be enabled by uh, fake video, fake audio of saying, this is your boss, give me the password or whatever. Uh, so we'll need kind of education and prevention against those kinds of attacks.
Back to education. Second time that you point out to what you feel.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a classic question that I get asked all the time. I'm gonna just forward it to you. Now that a 17-year-old applies to college and is going to choose what to study, what should she study?
yeah. Uh, well, study what you're interested in would be part of it. Uh, so let's see what to say about that. The one thing is, I've been involved in some of these learn to code initiatives with code.org and things like that. Uh, and I always thought that the wording was a little bit off. And and if it were me, I never would have championed learn to code. I would have said, well, learn to problem solve, learn to analyze a problem and create a model, and then see how well that model matches reality and break down a complicated problem into parts and try it and fail and then try again and debug and don't get frustrated and keep going until you get to the right answer. And I felt like those are all the valuable skills or lessons to learn. And yes, you can do that by coding, but the syntax of Python wasn't the important part. It was this whole problem solving process that's the important part. Uh, so I think that continues to be true. I guess another thing is I feel like how do we build AI systems today? Well, we put together data, computing power, and some algorithms. It used to be we really focused on saying to make breakthroughs, we need better algorithms. Feels like that's no longer true. And now it kind of feels like the weak part is, well, we got all the data, we got all the computing power, and we could optimize anything. But our problem is we don't know what to optimize. And we don't have good tools to tell us how to do that. And so, you get things like this decision support for judges making parole decisions. And North Point came up with this system to do that. And then ProPublica said, this is terrible. You're biased. When you make an error, you're twice as likely to harm a black defendant as a white defendant. And then they come back and say, oh, well, we thought about that. And according to our metrics, uh, we're what we call well calibrated, meaning if we give you a score of 6, you're 60% likely to recommit a crime. And that's more or less true whether you're white or black, male or female or whatever. So stop bothering us. And so I think the lesson there is figuring out what to optimize is a really complex problem. And North Point's mistake was not that they ignored the problem, they took it seriously, but they took it seriously by saying, hey, you engineer, invent some metric and then optimize it. When they should have said, let's put together a task force and get social justice experts, philosophers, people from different aspects of life, and have them work out what really is it that we should be optimizing. And then optimizing that will be easier. And so, maybe being a philosopher is more important than being a programmer.
I'll still surround the same question, which I take your answer perfectly, as like learn to solve problems in biology, physics, philosophy as a skill, and what is the label of the department matters less. Are there skills that you think are human that would not be replaced in the near future? I mean, I don't know far enough, but there's like all this future of work conversation.
Yeah.
Other ones that you say those are the ones that if you're looking for a job also in the next 5 years, if you do those, you're in better shape.
So I guess, being a person is something that people do better. Not every person does really well at being a person, but in general. And so, maybe these kind of social work or caregiving type work, I think that might be important. And then also, the purely digital is advancing much faster than the robotics. So anything that has where you're touching physical stuff, I think you're going to be okay for a couple decades.
Perfect. Almost done. My kind of last sphere of questions has to do with a little bit of advice and a little bit of predictions. First of all, um, politics is now very much related to AI or to technology. Silicon Valley, is not kind of sitting in a vacuum. It's related to politics and so on. What do you think if you had to give advice to kind of the US as a country? Is the right way to balance that? Like, should CEOs be more involved with politics? Should they kind of say, no, we're a technology company, we build best technologies? Should the idea that the US kind of is trying to down-regulate everything to be the fastest not be the case because it comes at the risk of like what's your take on the politics
Yeah,
here?
yeah. I guess a couple of things. So one is, I think we technologists should accept some blame for the situation we're in that we invented these kind of echo chambers where we kind of magnified voices that were louder and attention-seeking uh, rather than ones that were moderating and truth-seeking. And it would be great if we could figure out ways to stop doing that and get back to something. I guess in some ways, I'm hopeful that there is a possibility of good technical solutions to those types of issues. Because I feel like, uh, you know, the one you could say, do I want to fight this game of detecting what's fake? Uh, and I would like to avoid that. So yeah, somebody could create a fake video of somebody saying something, and maybe I could detect that and label it and so on. But I don't even want to get started in that. I would rather go back to something that's based more on provenance rather than content. Uh, and I think we were better off as a country when we did have that, right? So it used to be there were three TV networks, and depending on what town you're in, you had one or two newspapers, and those were the only choices you got. And you might feel like uh, your news outlet was a little bit biased, but you didn't feel like they were lying to you, right? If they made a mistake, they would kind of print a retraction. And yeah, they had a slant, but you could mostly believe it because they had a duty to the public. Uh, Now, instead of having three networks, there's a million popular bloggers, and they feel like they have no duty and no responsibility or accountability, so they can say anything they want. So I would rather go back to this provenance-based model of saying, you know, give me a system that will tell me voices that are a variety of voices, but that are held accountable in some way. And if they screw up or start lying, then they get kicked out. And I'll subscribe to that. Uh, and now maybe that will tamp down this extremism that we're feeling. So I think that's one part of the issue. Then I guess another thing you mentioned was regulation. Uh, I feel like there's no one answer to regulation. Government certainly has a role, and we just 2 weeks ago we did a AI boot camp for congressional aides at Stanford. So I got to participate in that. I thought that was really interesting, trying to get those aides kind of up to speed on what's going on. Now, the US has taken a more laid back attitude. Europe has been more aggressive on legislating on the AI front, although, some of that seems a little bit self serving, right? Because uh, as soon as Mistral started doing well, all of a sudden Macron saying, "Oh, well, maybe we shouldn't have quite so much regulation." Uh, so uh, there is a role for government to play, but I think there's many other roles as well. I think the large companies, talking to my peers at other companies, I think they take self-regulation very seriously, right? So AI safety is just a huge concern in all these companies. I worry that maybe in some of the smaller startups, there's less concern of that because just they haven't built up enough to be able to focus on that. Um, there can be there might be a role for more professional society regulation. So we don't really have that, right? So I'm a member of ACM, the Computing Professional Society, and I don't really feel like they constrain me in any way, right? So, I have some degrees, but I didn't need those degrees in order to say, I'm going to call myself a software engineer and I'm going to build and release some software. They just let you do that no matter what. You don't need any qualifications in order to call yourself a software engineer. But I couldn't say, you know what? I'm going to call myself a civil engineer and I'm going to go out and build a bridge. They don't let you do that, right? There are rules for who gets to build bridges, and so maybe the professional society should have some kind of a role there when you get, I don't want to stymie the whole software industry, but maybe if there's some certain level of size and so on, then that has to step in. And then there's kind of third parties. And I actually joined an AI safety board from Underwriters Laboratory. And I thought they were an interesting organization because historically, go back 100 and something years, and the public was also worried that they were all going to die because of new technology. And the new technology was electricity. And Underwriters Laboratory stepped in and said, we're going to put this sticker on your toaster, and it says it's not going to kill you. And consumers trusted that little sticker, and therefore companies voluntarily submitted themselves to the certification process. And so I think that kind of certification or auditing is useful. And I think it's probably better if it's done by a nonprofit, third party, private organization rather than done by the government, which would tend to be slower moving.
I support. My last question. What's your advice to our audience? Is going to be, I think, a young entrepreneur, senior business leaders that don't do AI but want to get into AI, and some, I think, graduate students who just heard your name and said, I've got to watch that.
Yeah.
Advice to maybe all of them about the coming year and what they should focus on, or you can separate it to
Yeah.
advice.
I mean, I think it's an exciting time. And I think, there really is a difference for, you know, 5 years ago, if I was on a show like this, I would say, well, I'm really only talking to computer science majors or grad students who are sort of deeply into the technology. They're really the only ones that are going to touch it. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I guess, some people touch it as a user. They're going to be using speech recognition or whatever, but mostly it's art for just the experts. But now it's, everybody will be using these AI tools. Everybody already is using these tools. And so, yes, you have the opportunity to say, I'm going to be part of an AI company and I can do that without the muss and bother of getting a PhD. Uh, but it's also, my company's going to do something completely unrelated, but AI is going to be a part of it, that I'm going to use these tools to make my company more effective. And so I think it's just keeping on top of that and, you know, find the newsletters that you like or the friends that will share things with you and try out new tools and don't waste too much time on them. Uh, but try to find the right mix between exploiting what already works with you and exploring new possibilities. Because the new possibilities, as you said, are changing every month.
I'm adding a one last based on that. How do you keep up? How does Peter learn things,
Yeah,
knows what's going on, and not being left behind?
I feel like I'm not, right? I can't. And so, you know, I have some newsletters. I have a group of friends. Uh, some people I know were like really into Twitter. I never got into that, but I figure if something is important enough, I'll get it through one of these channels. It'll show up. Uh, and then I got to decide, is this worth playing with? And it's hard to decide. Uh, I also feel like there's kind of this generational difference in how important it is to really understand the technology. Uh, and so this just happened the other day with a teammate, right? So it's like, well, here's this exciting new tool package. I think this will solve part of our problem. And so I'm reading about it. And then my colleague comes back and says, well, I'm done.
Mhm.
I said, what do you mean I'm done? Said, well, I figured out we got to call this thing and pass it this, and then it gets back this answer, and that's the right answer. Then we're done. And I'm saying, but I don't understand how this tool works. Like, how does it do X, Y, and Z? And they say, oh, I have no idea, but it got the right answer. And I feel like this really is kind of a generational thing. Of if you're a younger person, you've been exposed to so many new things that you understand that you can't have a deep understanding of all of them. And so skimming the surface is a good way to go. If you're someone like me, you're coming out of a background where it used to be there were only a few things available. And so it made sense to understand them completely. And I realized, we each had a different viewpoint on this, but we're each driven by tradition rather than by what's right. And sometimes it's right to really understand it deeply, because if you don't, something bad's going to happen. And sometimes that's a complete waste of time, and you should just solve it as quickly as you can and move on and not worry that you don't have a deep understanding. And I realize I'm by my nature going too far in one direction, and I worry that some of these younger generation, by their nature, are going too far in the other direction, and trying to figure out how can I get to the right middle point.
I think I
And
studied physics back in the day and didn't understand something. I was told this quote, I think by Feynman, that says, in physics, you don't understand things, you get used to them.
yeah, yeah, that might be part of it.
And I think that maybe, but I think that now that I know what your thoughts are, I feel that this instruction conversation was mostly about education. In different ways, we spoke about one theme, which is how
Yeah.
do we learn and how do we teach ourselves. So I think that maybe is the theme of this exchange.
Hmm. Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you very much, Peter, for the time
Yeah,
and
it's
very, very
a pleasure.
helpful
Good to talk to you.
as well. Bye bye.
All right. All right. Bye.